Hello, everyone, and welcome to what's going to be a new unschooling series, I think, because I got to prodding in TikTok and stuff, and there's just a lot to cover. There's two unschooling moms in particular, those that at least claim that they're unschooling, that I want to do at least a year in the TikTok, if not just like regularly follow them, like a once a month post or something, kind of going over their TikToks. But for today, we're actually going to start with a video reaction to a different YouTuber who has serious problems with the unschoolers. And given the clips that he showed, I understand that. Um, at some point, we'll also probably, there's a couple of other videos that are probably worth reacting to. And then there's an entire unschooling tag on TikTok that I would like to go through. There's a lot to go through. And it's something that I think is going to be an ongoing series for a little while, maybe like a once a month video sort of thing. Before we get into it, I kind of want to get into I was unschooled from, well, I was homeschooled from about mid third grade through fifth grade, and then we unschooled from there until college. I think in my community post I said third grade until college, but there was a little bit of a gray area for a couple of years. And the reason why I was pulled from school, the most reductive way to put it was bullying and a lack of faith in the schooling system, but I really don't feel like that does the situation justice because it was a fucking shit show. And I kind of want to give you guys a little bit of a story time that led up to me being homeschooled because I think that it provides some perspective as to why some parents choose it. It's going to almost sound like an r/that happened sort of story in some areas. I promise all of this, to the best of my recollection, is how things happened. So it started at the end of my second grade school year. There were some issues that I had with a girl that just did not like me. I don't think I did anything to her. I actually remember really wanting to be her friend, and she just did not like me. And so there was like some issues with her and her mother and what the school was like allowing to have. I genuinely don't remember much from my second grade year. It just wasn't that impactful. She was just kind of a snotty child. And then there was my parents were raising concerns at because every time they like would stop by my school, my mom volunteered in my classroom a couple of times, and there were a couple of times when I had early pickup, and they noticed that one it was easy to just walk onto the school campus. You could easily just walk onto the school campus, but none of the doors remained closed, and even those that were closed weren't locked. And so my parents were kind of worried about my safety. And they brought it up to school admin, and they're like, well, parents have to come and get a visitor's pass. They have to come and get a visitor's pass, and if we see someone without a visitor's pass and that's not staff, we we handle it. And so my stepdad, who worked the hours that I was in school, so and we didn't really go to after school functions much, so no one had really known him. He went in, walked into a random building, walked up and down the halls, circulated the campus, went into the building I was in, um, stood right by my classroom for a while. People walked by, saw him, no one questioned anything. And he was not like a professional looking guy. Like he was someone that wore ripped jeans and sweatshirts everywhere. He was an electrician. He did not he wasn't dressed in any way that could be mistaken for staff. And when my parents brought this up to the school, they kind of brushed them off and said, "Oh, well, the teachers probably assumed he was a parent." One, this is an elementary school. You shouldn't be assuming anything. He doesn't have a visitor's pass. And two, why would you just like if you don't know who it is and policy is that the parents have to go to the office for a visitor's pass, like this was before Columbine, this was before the concerns around security that we have today, but that was a serious concern of my mother was always concerned for my safety, and so that rubbed her the wrong way. Cut to just before my third grade year, my teacher, who was my second grade teacher and was going to also be my third grade teacher, actually won lotto and quit her job. So the school had to rush to hire a new teacher. It was a first year teacher. I remember her fairly vividly. She was a chubbier woman with bright red hair. Not like a natural red. It was naturally red hair, but it was red hair. And she was had a very soft voice, I remember. My mom had also asked me not to be put in the class with that girl from second grade who did not like me. They put me in the same class with her and they refused to let me move classrooms. So that was another issue that was put like that made my mom question the school and all of that. Second day of school, I got sick. I had a 104-degree fever and threw up on the playground, and they would not let me go to the nurse. So my mom was furious and was like angrily calling at the time. I'm not sure what happened, but I was ended up being out of school for a few days because I had the flu. About midway, no, it was the end of September. The teacher, the new first year teacher, had a breakdown in the classroom. She just started sobbing uncontrollably, saying, "I can't do this." It was an event, like no one knew what to do. Where everyone was like looking at each other. Where this is a bunch of young first graders, like it's September of third grade, and we're all looking at each other like what the fuck. And then a couple of them are like jumping on the kids that regularly gave her a hard time of, look what you did, you made the teacher cry, you're a bad student. But most of us just like did not know what to do, and eventually I don't know how long she was having this breakdown before another teacher came in. I think they heard because she kept getting louder, and they like someone else came to watch our class for the rest of, like, I don't know if it was a sub. I don't know. I just know that like no one knew what to do. This was like just after lunch, so there was about a third of the day left, I think. So that was a thing. Next day we had a teacher that had been pulled from another classroom, was very clear that she wasn't happy to be there, didn't like any of us, but brought a student that was kind of an asshole. I don't know why she brought him. But she could not control the classroom at all. It was loud constantly, and anytime she gave us work, me and like four or five other girls would go do work out in the hallway at a table because the classroom was simply too loud for us to focus on the work. I mean, it was loud. So I don't know if my mother knew about this. I think I told her about it, but that would kind of lend to like issues with the classroom, issues with the school that she had been that are like building up. Then it came time for like interpersonal conflict. The two friends that I had one day when I was approaching them decided to run away from me and then like turn around and laugh at me. Uh, and that happened for like a couple of days and till I finally gave up. But then I don't know if they got the rest of the class to do it or if the class just caught on to it, but then everyone in my class started doing that to me. No one would talk to me. Even in class, people wouldn't talk to me, and nothing was done about it. The teacher, I think the recess teachers were busy handling other things, and the my classroom teacher, I couldn't control the class to begin with, so like I don't think she had any idea of what was going on interpersonally. But it caught on until like vaguely remember a day when like no one would talk to me. Like no one on the playground would talk to me, like across the grade level. And that snotty girl that, and I was like this had been going on for, this had been getting progressively worse, probably over a week-ish. And that snotty girl who I was desperate to be friends with said that she would be my friend. And keep in mind, I was like desperate for friends at this point because no one would talk to me. She came up to me, she said, "I'll be your friend if you do this thing that gets you in trouble." And it was just something like, it was undercover recess because it was raining, and the rain was coming down on the side, and we weren't allowed to like stand out in the rain. So I ran out of the covered area and then back in. Teacher saw me immediately. I got in trouble, was put up against the wall and scolded, and then this naughty girl and she called over some other kids to laugh at me. Like this, and like But they were kind of like laughing in this kind of just silent mocking way, I think, because the teacher's back was to them and they didn't want to let her know. Like they were just awful, awful children. Um, and at this point, we're probably mid towards the end of October, not November, but October. And we go back. This is the same day. We go back, and I'm putting my coat in my little cubby. We have these little cubbies, and the way it worked was the snotty girl had her cubby right next to mine, and the doors would open towards each other, right? And I'm trying to put my thing away, but I keep getting hit with my door. And I look over because it was two kids to a cubby. And I look over and she's pushing the door against me, like on purpose. And I try to ignore her and I'm trying to put it, but I can't even get my coat up because she keeps pushing the cubby door against me. And eventually I like kind of um lost my shit a little bit and I threw my entire because I was a couple inches taller than her and a little bit heavier than her. I was a bit of a chubby kid and she was thin. So I threw my entire body weight up against the cubby door. And I don't know what happened to her. I didn't look. I didn't see what happened to her. I just hung up my coat and went back to my desk. Um because I was just so over everything at that point. I was probably depressed. And so she goes and tells the teacher. They both come to my desk. She's crying, and apparently she got hurt when I did that. I don't know. I don't know like how exactly she was hurt, and it was just one I like so had not any fucks to give. If anything, I think I enjoyed a little bit that she was crying. And so the teacher tells me and asks me what I did, and I, like a moron, admitted, yes, I did that, but she, and I tried to explain my side of what happened. Teacher didn't want to hear it, just said you both need to apologize to each other. And I said she started it, so she has to say sorry first. And the girl didn't want to, but like I was staring daggers at her. I don't think I hated anyone as much as I hated her at that point. And she eventually said sorry. I gave my first ever, like, truly insincere apology, I think, because I had no fucks to give. I don't really remember what happened exactly after that. Over the next couple of days, I think I just kept my head down. They didn't contact my mom about that. Surprisingly, my mom has no recollection of ever being contacted about me getting physical with a classmate. And then right after Halloween, I got sick. I had strep throat. And it was like my second or third time having strep throat, and the doctor was worried that my tonsils would have to be removed. And I was given a heavier dose of antibiotics than I had the previous two times. So I ended up missing, and then I think I had to go in for. I think I had to go into the doctor's office again. I don't remember for sure, but I remember missing like a week of school, right? And when I come back, the teacher just sets a week's worth of worksheets on my desk and tells me that I need to try to get through all of it as much as I can today, while also doing the assignments that she's putting forth in class that day. I got to go out to recess during lunch recess because you got to go right after, but I had to stay inside for second recess to do the worksheets. I remember just being so overwhelmed. I think I came home in tears that day, and that's when my mom like put forth the the process of um homeschooling me. I think she may have even pulled me out like that day and just not sent me back because I came home absolutely distraught. And that is what started our homeschooling journey. It was a bunch of fuckery for sure. And like I understand if some of you don't believe me because it seems like an out there story. It happened. I have no way to give you guys proof. All I can say is that this is what happened. What we're gonna see in the video that we're looking at is some people talking about not wanting their kids to be part of the establishment. Some kids do it for really, and a lot of people think that homeschooling is done primarily for religious reasons. Sometimes it's also just done because of really terrible experiences with the public school system and or bullying. For the majority of the kids that I met in different like homeschool groups at the time, that most of them had been bullied out of school. And that's what their parents decided for them. So I My mom homeschooled me as best she could. There were these like big, like 600-page curriculum workbooks that you could get that covered all of the primary subjects, but they only made those up through fifth grade. And so from middle school onward, there was nothing comprehensive that you could get. And even the stuff that you could get didn't touch every subject. So from there, we decided to unschool, which I will get more into as we're reacting to the video. But now we're gonna finally move on to the video. I hope you enjoyed my story time, and let's get started. This is Kevin F.
Kevin, and a few days ago I was just scrolling along on Twitter, as you do, and something really strange came across my timeline. Now I know it's Twitter, what the fuck did I expect, as every second I spend on that godforsaken excuse for a website is a second that's ultimately shaved off my lifespan, but this was something else. I came across this post, which is a TikTok someone shared of a parent explaining the...
Oh, wait, I want to see. These parents think moving at the rate of a child's natural curiosity is a sufficient pace for learning, but they are failing to exploit the most plastic years of brain development, and these children will forever be behind in life because of their selfish, lazy parents. So, actually, we can actually already start with unschooling. Traditional unschooling is meant to be a Montessori style way of learning minus the curriculum. You kind of build the curriculum as you go, essentially. And actually, this is where I'm going to start like butting heads with some of the people that are against it. I think unschooling can work well for certain types of children. I was an extraordinarily curious child. I had a lot of curiosity and I was interested in most things, and I loved reading. So for me, it worked out pretty well. There are some kids though where I would say that it is not, especially like kids that I saw in the homeschool group. Even my own sister, I think, would have benefited more from a different style of education. I could be wrong. I'm not sure how she viewed her experience, but we have different personalities, and she is much more of a social butterfly. And while there's social opportunities in homeschooling, it's not the same as public school. And so I think that homeschooling, going at the pace of a child's curiosity, can actually work depending on who the child is. And a child's curiosity can be sparked by parent involvement and exposure to different things. So going at the pace of a child's curiosity can be done if the parent is very involved.
Post, which is a TikTok someone shared of a parent explaining the unique way they homeschool their child. And from the looks of the caption and the replies, I could already tell that this isn't just homeschooling, but something completely different. This parent is failing her child at the most fundamental level. I can't believe she's bragging about how far behind her child is. This kid is gonna be 18 reading at a first grade level. This is genuine child neglect. This should be considered child neglect. That's right, this person doesn't just homeschool their kids. They come from a community of parents online that essentially don't school their children at all. This parent is a member of the unschooling community. What's unschooling, you might ask? Well, unschooling is an unorthodox parent-led teaching method that centers mostly...
It should be child-led, not parent-led. I just want to put that out there. It's parent-facilitated. It should be parent-facilitated but child-led.
Around letting children choose what they want to learn, when they want to learn it, and teaching them exclusively based on what they show interest in.
So we don't teach our children anything. Everything that they learn is in response to either their interests or their questions.
The basic idea...
That is fundamentally wrong. She is doing it wrong. I'm sorry. Like, we're going to even see more, but like, you don't teach your children anything. Even in unschooling, you teach your children. My mom still taught me because I showed an interest in math, and she worked with me through like a workbook. I actually didn't show that much interest in math. I just wanted to be able to do what the other kids my age could do, and that was like the channeling for math. But I showed interest in astronomy. I was like really into astronomy when I was a kid. So while my mom didn't teach me about astronomy directly, she contacted the local astronomical society that had various classes for kids and opportunities to go at night to a local park with people who had telescopes on certain like nights where you would be able to see certain planets. And I went and the people let me look through their telescope and I got to see Jupiter and Venus were the ones that I remember seeing the most. And then there was another opportunity where I got to see Mars and Mercury. You do teach your children. It's just what you teach your children is led by the child's interest.
The idea of it is to play more to their strengths rather than the standardized approach to education that most people are used to. If they don't want to learn math, hey, no problem. If they don't want to learn to read and write, don't force it. It'll come naturally. And if they want to spend the day watching and analyzing episode 75 of Skibidi Toilet, then so it shall be.
So, for the record, most unschoolers that I've seen, because there was even like an unschooling group, the child-led learning was typically done after they did the reading, writing, arithmetic, and then once the foundation for those was done, then they switched to unschooling. There were a couple that were just unschooling right off the bat, but they were like really big on literacy. So the kids were still required, like it just kind of there. Every parent has different priorities, but there was a focus of switching to unschooling with subjects like social studies. And once the child was proficient in reading, then they got to choose their own reading material. Writing, they got to write about what they wanted, that sort of thing. It wasn't a complete free for all. Just to put that out there.
Hey, Gen Alpha. Just checking in, making sure everything's okay with you guys. Is everything okay? Is everything all right with you guys? It is a radically different, almost faith-based approach to education that has been gaining traction on platforms like TikTok. You know, the short-form video platform that has never radicalized anyone.
We have no curriculum. We have no school hours. We really just respond whenever they want to know something and do our best to make sure they really get it.
You teach your kid what you want them to learn, and a lot of the times you leave it up to them of what they want to learn.
So this whole process that is gaining traction online of pulling your young children out of school and unregistering them and taking a more free approach to learning is often referred to as radical unschooling or free school, and is, in addition to being a more kid-focused approach to learning, also meant to be taken as sort of a form of protest against the traditional schooling system, with many of the parents in these communities heavily criticizing traditional schooling.
If you do not like this idea of sending your kids away for 40 hours a week and then wondering why they have no energy to do anything else, if you are not into your kids conforming,
my intuition, my motherly instincts are screaming at me that the schooling system is not for my kids.
So that is what we're going to talk about.
I will give him this here. So a lot of parents were disillusioned with public school system, primarily because their kids were bullied. But then there were a few in every group I was ever in. There was always there was the Mormon family. I remember the Mormon family where they wanted their girls to learn the Mormon way. So like that was something. Went to their house. Nice house. The kids had a variety of reading materials. They weren't allowed to read Harry Potter. All the girls could play piano. But they, as far as I knew, like did not believe in teaching their children science by way of like no evolutionary theory, that sort of thing. And then there were the libertarian parents. This was like the only family, and everyone found them very abrasive because they believed that schools were brainwashing the kids, and we need to be prepared. Like they were 2012, what's the term, like doomsdayers. They were a doomsdaying family. I never went to their house, but they were an interesting family and left the group pretty quickly. So I don't know what happened to those kids.
Today, we're going to take a look at the unschooling movement, what it is and why it exists, and break it down to see how unschooling has had a hand in recent decreases in educational standards, as well as how social media and content algorithms play a role in how people find and join radical movements like this one. Let's get into it. So I think the most obvious criticism that you can make about the whole unschooling thing is that kids deserve a quality education, and this is not that, right?
So we don't teach our children anything.
You teach your kid what you want them to learn, and a lot of the times you leave it up to them of what they want to learn.
What?
So you teaching your kids what you want them to learn, that is closer to homeschooling than it is to unschooling. Unschooling is meant to be a Montessori style, child-led, parent-facilitated form of education. If you are saying, I want the kids to learn this, then that's just you kind of being a parent. It is your job to provide opportunities to spark your child's curiosity. My mom was very involved. She was always looking for learning opportunities for us to go and learn anything that we were interested in.
Shall we use to conduct this beautiful current with? What one particular element comes to mind? Wire.
As much as kids might hate school and not want to go or not want to apply themselves and learn, it still provides a lot of value not only to each individual kid, but to society as a whole to ensure that kids are educated. I mean, even
To be fair, I just want to provide a counterpoint to this. It's meant to provide a standard form of education, this is true. And it does probably provide a wider breadth that kids would not necessarily think to explore on their own. But I will say that something that I really noticed both in my college and as an adult is that one of the things that I learned with unschooling was I really developed my research skills, because there was never a book that had all the answers. I had to learn how to find different reputable sources, both in book form and online, that had the information that I want, with my mom acting as kind of a facilitator of like validating, yes, this is a good source, no, that's not a good source, that sort of thing. And by doing that, and by way of essentially teaching myself for a lot of it, like if I struggled, my mom would help me, but it was largely me kind of teaching myself. I've been able to teach myself many things that many grown adults around me are like, well, I could never learn that. I tried once and it didn't work. Where in unschooling, you really learn how to try and try and try and try and try and try. And typically around the 10th time, you'll get it. Or like it can take 10 tries before you get a full picture or whatever. So there is value in unschooling as well in terms of being like a functioning adult. And while there are definitely holes in my education from unschooling, I do think that the skills that I gained from unschooling were a reasonable trade-off for me personally. This is not going to be true for everyone.
outside of your traditional subject learning, school provides a lot of life knowledge that kids need to learn growing up. School is where most people learn how to budget their time, how to handle responsibilities, how to meet deadlines, and most importantly, how to exist in a social environment with people they don't know. And this is kind of a
To be fair, I think that was like you can learn how to function in an environment with people you don't know through homeschooling as well. We bounce a lot around to a lot of different homeschool groups. And so that's a possibility. Learning how to meet deadlines. Some parents did enforce deadlines, some parents did not. And this is kind of where unschooling does have a bit of an issue with it, in that there is no standardization. So so each child's unschooling can look very different based on the child and based on the parent. And so I do think that some kids probably struggled in transition to the for lack of a better term, real world, than kind of the insulated homeschool, unschooling environments that we grew up in. I can definitely see that. But for me, the biggest thing that I think was like the struggle that made my first year of college very, very difficult for me was following a schedule, because my unschooling and homeschooling life was very unstructured and unscheduled. I did things as was best for me in the day. I'm a natural night owl. I did a lot of my unschooling work later in the day because I was not a morning person. I couldn't do that in college. There was set times to be in class. I was not used to that, and doing that day in, day out for a year was probably one of the hardest things that I had done up to that point. I was not used to it at all. It was really hard for me at the time, and it's because I never had to do it. I don't think anyone that has been in public school would struggle with that transition, but that was something that I really struggled with. I will give him that. I'll give him that. Most of society functions on a kind of preset schedule. Any job you have functions on a preset schedule. So going from a very unstructured setting and being able to kind of set your own hours and and kind of control your time and where it goes to a very structured setting is something that was pretty difficult for me. I think it was difficult for a few other kids that I had contact with once they had to be in that kind of structured, scheduled setting.
Critique I've always had of homeschooling in general, the fact that if your kid doesn't need to be homeschooled, like due to some developmental or medical issue, then most of the time I think homeschooling is just doing a disservice to your child, both socially and developmentally, because public school ultimately does two things. Not only does it provide that aforementioned life knowledge that is crucial to the development of children, but the institution of public education guarantees some standard of education for
No, it doesn't. I gotta put that out there. No, it doesn't. It doesn't guarantee it. Not, at least not at this point. Something that I've noticed being in public schools myself is there's a kid that there's always a couple of kids that like do nothing. They'll do nothing the entire year, and then they'll still be passed on to the next grade. There is a thing in public school where kids are not held accountable the same way anymore. I don't know how it was like when I was growing up, but the way it works now is kids can are just kind of pushed along through the system and can graduate high school with a second grade reading level. Like, as long as they have all their credits and teachers are encouraged by parents and by admin to just pass a kid along, not hold them back, none of that, uh, that can be an issue.
for students across the board. If my kid is in public school, I can be reasonably confident and knowledgeable on what subjects they're being taught and how they're progressing in them, because there is a pre-existing standard that I can compare them to see where they need more work and where they're excelling. Whereas with homeschooling,
That's a reasonable. I think that's a really reasonable point. Is if you want like a general standard of where your child should be and where their weaknesses are. That's a really reasonable point. I can see that.
both the consistency and quality of education the child receives is pretty much up to the parent and can't be objectively measured by an outside party. If every kid was homeschooled, how do we know how our kids are doing in school on a systemic level? How would we know if there are public issues we need to address with education? How would we know if their reading comprehension levels or math and logic capabilities are progressing at a normal rate? The answer is we wouldn't. And this unschooling thing just takes those things and makes them that much worse and that much more unreliable. Where there was already ambiguity and distrust in homeschooling, unschooling magnifies and amplifies those concerns and makes the waters even murkier regarding the quality of youth education at a systemic level. So let's pivot back to this mom for just a second, because I think this is a really good showcase not only of what unschooling is and how it works, but also the consequences of it.
So for the record, the clip he's about to show, I have a lot of problems with. It is not a good representation of unschooling. I just want to be clear with that, and I'm going to point out why.
And the types of people who tend to participate in it.
My big fear about free schooling was that if my kids only went towards what they were interested in, saving all of their real estate only for things they're interested in, not cramming it with anything necessary, I was concerned that they would never be interested in things like reading and writing and math.
You know, when I first started letting my kids decide what they eat for dinner every day, I was concerned that they weren't going to naturally gravitate towards nutritious things like vegetables and protein. But then my 3-year-old came to me and she said, "Mommy, you know what? I don't want gummy bears again. I want broccoli. I know I may not like it, but I know in the long run it's best for my health. So please, give me vegetables." She really said that. And then everyone clapped. But okay, in all seriousness, she seems like somewhat aware and cautious of the potential risks associated with this method of education. maybe she has some compelling results. Let's just give her the benefit of the doubt and see before we criticize.
My son's 6, and it took some patience and not comparing myself to other moms, but this is his book. Look at this. Lamp, egg, jar, lion.
So, right off the bat, I just want to point out that she is doing her son a serious disservice, and this is not what we mean by unschooling, where he can just write things down and yay, he's learning to write. No, your child is clearly showing an interest in writing. So what you need to do is get proper writing paper where it's bigger because their hands are smaller, their motor skills are not developed yet. You need to have like actual writing paper meant for beginner writers to help him understand spacing and how it's supposed to be written on the line. You should have workbooks, which there are plenty of workbooks for first grade level kids on writing and sentence structure. They wouldn't be able to write very complex sentences yet, but simple sentences are generally within his age range. He's showing an interest. You should be flooding him with materials to help him develop that. That is unschooling. He has shown an interest. It is don't just hand him a notebook and say write words. That makes no fucking sense. This was you failing as a parent. This was you failing as a parent, and she's someone that I genuinely want to cover on TikTok because she doesn't get it, and it's pissing me off a little bit. Give him a proper pencil or get one of the thick pencils. There's thick pencils now for kindergarten and first graders because their hands are small and their motor skills aren't developed yet, so it's easier for them to grip. That's something that would help him. Paper geared towards kids his age to practice writing and proper spacing is important. He's showing an interest. That is part of unschooling. He has shown the interest. Therefore, writing is now part of what you are teaching him. He's not going to get it through osmosis, and most unschoolers that I've ever experienced do not believe that kids just get it through osmosis. It's meant to be parent facilitated, meaning that you need to facilitate his writing education because that's what he's shown an interest in. That's how unschooling is supposed to work.
Yeah, ma'am, I hate to be the one to break this to you. Your son is cooked. Yeah, I'm sorry. There's just no way to talk around that. I mean, at 6 years old, kids can typically write full basic sentences as well as form their letters accurately.
For the record, this is a little yes and no, and it depends on where he is within first grade. Like, I'd like to know what the date was of that video that was posted, because early on, the kids are still just writing more complex words than they were in kindergarten, and learning how to write basic sentences. His handwriting wasn't unusual for the first graders that I've ever seen. Like, was it neat? No, he definitely needs to learn how to write within a space on a piece of paper, like a line on a piece of lined paper, which is why the mom needs to get him that special spaced writing where it's like extra large. But the handwriting of the child and the kind of misformation of the letters isn't terribly uncommon. It is also worth noting, I just want to throw this out there, that kindergarten isn't federally required. Actually, a lot of students come in to first grade having never been in school before, and that's kind of how their writing can be as well. It's not great, and he's not going to progress because mom is just fucking thinking he's going to get it through osmosis rather than properly supporting his education. But where he is right now isn't really behind where he should be. Like, he needs to be able to start forming some basic sentences, but he's not, especially depending on what time of year we're looking at, he's not cooked, as Kevin has said. He is within a realm, he's at the lower end of normal, but he's still within what I would consider a normal range for first grade.
Your child struggled with the words egg and jar.
You stupid.
But hey, at least he did it out of his own volition and, wasn't forced into being able to effectively communicate. And what really gets me about this mom and content like this is that this isn't the slightest bit alarming to them, right? Like, in fact, this is what they're showing off, right? Like, this is what they're proud of. The fact that their 6-year-old now knows a grand total of 4 words. And it really is a shame because, like this tweet says, they're failing to take advantage of the most vital years of brain development for these kids. I mean, if they're this behind already, imagine how that...
So I agree she's not taking full advantage of the development of his brain and getting him where he needs to be. Like, she is not doing well in supporting that. I don't think he's that far behind. He's a little behind, but I wouldn't say he's like super ridiculously far behind. 6 years old is first grade. I've worked with a ton of kindergarten and first graders. He's within the realm of normal. He's not as far along as he could be, but he could still very easily catch up.
Gap in skill and knowledge compared to their peers is going to scale as they get older. These are the years we lay an educational foundation in our kids for a reason, because at this age, their brains are little sponges. They are capable of soaking up more information at this stage in their life than at basically any other stage, which makes these vital years for laying the critical infrastructure necessary for them to succeed in life. And that's what makes videos like these feel so tragic to me, because no matter how it's framed, at the end of the day, these parents are setting their kids up for failure. They'll say that the school system is untrustworthy or that the state shouldn't impose education on their kids and claim it's in the best interest of the child, but then turn around and fail to give them the tools they'll need to be successful. Like, take a...
So for the record, yes, these parents are definitely doing that. They're failing to give the kids tools to be successful. But some of the reasons that he's saying for pulling kids out for homeschooling and unschooling, that was not my experience as someone who grew up in unschooling places. Almost every child, there were a couple of like, my child's going to be a free thinker, and then like the libertarians and the religious families that I mentioned, but the majority of them were where the oldest sibling, the oldest child, experienced bullying and like the school didn't do anything about it, and like the oldest child, their mental health started to decline and the parents couldn't watch it and decided to pull and homeschool slash unschool. A lot of the younger, like my sister was even given the opportunity of going to public school. Like, it was not, a lot of the parents are not necessarily anti-public school. A lot of them will still try it with the younger children to see if they fare better. And some of them there were hybrid families. There were families that, where some children were homeschooled slash unschooled. And then there were a couple of kids that went to public school because they wanted to and they liked it. It's not necessarily all or nothing. I think homeschooling and unschooling can be good for certain children.
Look at this other mom who posts about unschooling her kids on TikTok.
There's so many comments in my comment section about, well, what if they want to be a doctor or a lawyer? And I think I've already mentioned this before one time already, but like the likelihood of my kids wanting to do something that they don't see that I'm normalizing is very slim. On top of, I'm very proactive inside of my profession and my career of being an entrepreneur, they're likely going to follow that path because they're going to...
This is such a stupid line of thought. No, you need to expose your children to other ideas, to other possibilities for careers. This to me just says, honestly, with her in particular, and she is someone we are covering, and she is someone that I'm not just doing like a year in the TikTok on. She's going to be a regular updated, we're looking at her channel, because she fucking pisses me off. She strikes me as someone that isn't actually interested in homeschooling or unschooling. She wants to use her children and this whole thing for social media clout and to monetize them. That is, and I will get into her. She is her own issue.
See how successful...
Oh my fucking... Jesus Christ. Seriously? So I've been seeing a lot of comments on my page basically saying like, what if your kid wants to be successful? What if they want to be a doctor or a lawyer? And let me just say, like, No kid of mine is going to be a doctor or a lawyer, okay? They're going to be TikTok influencers and entrepreneurs like mommy, okay? Like, you guys just don't get it. I'm taking those opportunities away from them before their little brains can even entertain the idea. The idea is to crush any hope they have of becoming those things before they even have the knowledge to want to. Think before you comment, okay, sweetie? And look, I understand on some level why these parents do it. It can be scary as a parent to trust others with your kid, to hand them over for 40 hours a week to people you don't know and trust that they're getting what they need. That's why so many parents feel that their kid is better off being educated by them at home, because then there's no risk. They don't have to enter a foreign social environment. They don't have to participate in tasks that
I would say, at least from what, now granted, I was homeschooled like 20 years ago. So maybe I'm totally willing to acknowledge that the landscape has probably changed. From when I was growing up, the general idea of it wasn't that parents necessarily had a problem handing their kids over to like a public school, but they felt like the public school had failed them. That was why they pulled out their kids for homeschooling or unschooling. That it's that they felt like those that they had entrusted with their children had already failed. That was kind of the issue.
the parents wouldn't necessarily approve of, and their education can be closely monitored and controlled by the primary caregiver. But unfortunately, all of these things come with a cost to the child. Like we said before, children that are homeschooled typically have a harder time socially acclimating to the outside world, and on top of that, an unschooled education just isn't held to as high of a standard as it would be with public school.
These are both, I gotta give it to him. These are reasonable critiques. Uh I definitely had a harder time acclimatizing to a the social etiquette and the socialization of like the general world. My sister had less of an issue with it. She was more socially adept than I was, but she was also less curious, so I could see how also like the standard of her education didn't quite meet, and probably mine as well, because there are definitely holes in my education. So like this, there is some legitimacy to his critiques here.
That unschooled kids are far less likely to get a quality education than those in the system. And this belief that children should be the ones to dictate what they learn and when is just homeschooling with more risk and less reward. And if you think about it, it defeats the very purpose of parenting. Kids are stupid. They don't know right from wrong. They can't take care of themselves. They have no concept of personal responsibility or hygiene and aren't able to make informed decisions on their own behalf. The literal reason parents exist is to guide their children, to tell them right from wrong, to give them knowledge, to make them do stuff they don't want to do because they know it's better for them in the long run. We make kids brush their teeth because they don't understand hygiene and wouldn't if we didn't tell them to. We make them look both ways before crossing the street because if they didn't, they would be promptly flattened by oncoming traffic. We make kids eat vegetables because they don't understand their own health, and we eat fucking Sour Patch Kids for every meal if we let them. So why the fuck would we think kids would be able to tell you what's best for them to learn in school? The answer is they can't. Kids need guidance in virtually every area of their lives because they don't have the life experience yet to know what's good for them. And it is the job of the parent to make sure that they are being nurtured properly, both physically and mentally, and that they're given the materials early on that they need to have a good and happy life. And letting kids dictate their own education and not providing them a framework to follow or goals to achieve just teaches kids that they never need to apply themselves, that whatever they...
Okay, I disagree with this, and this is where I think that unschooling and homeschooling fall on a child by child basis. That, they never need to be held accountable, that they never need to do things that they don't want to do. That's not entirely true. They never need to apply themselves. That's not true. I would say that I applied myself more to my unschooling and kind of teaching myself and reading, and I even developed some of my own projects and stuff because I was really interested in what I was learning. So there is plenty of application, but this depends on the child. There are plenty of kids that don't want to do that. I was very academically minded. I was very curious, and my big struggle was socially. And while I think homeschooling and unschooling kind of delayed the inevitable of me kind of having to grapple with that, I think it after the time that I had early on in my education, I kind of needed that isolation, that insulation, that protection, uh, social issue. Should I have been reintroduced to something more social earlier than I was? Probably. But I don't think that unschooling means that the kids don't apply themselves at all. I think it kind of depends on the child. There's some kids that are going to be more curious about things and than other kids, and it kind of depends on what works best for the child. Honestly, I online schooling wasn't an option at the time, and I think more than anything I just needed the quiet and the security of my home, and I probably would have been fine with online public school, but that wasn't an option at the time. The homeschooling options at the time were not good for middle and high school. So unschooling was the most advantageous form of schooling at the time for my family.
Want is how the world will be. That they can go through life just pursuing whatever interests them without ever doing anything they don't want to do. It teaches them not to.
So again, that's not never doing anything they don't want to do. One thing that my mom really instilled in me is that everything has good and bad parts. And one thing that she would kind of make me do is if I showed an interest in something, but then like I didn't want to because I didn't want to deal with this one part that I liked. She's like, no, you showed an interest in this. Give it a full fair shake and read through the entire thing. And we'd have conversations about it. Sometimes I would write summaries of the books that I read or make slideshows that kind of talked about what I learned and that sort of thing. So, not having to do anything you don't want to do isn't entirely true. It's just mitigated. There's more of a negotiation for what you don't want to do.
Expect and overcome adversity, but to never even know it exists in the first place. It sets them up to believe that the world is as forgiving and as patient as their parents are, with the mindset that they're entitled to whatever desires they choose to pursue in life. And simply none of that is true. And I will say, it is a disservice to any kid to teach them that. In fact, it borders on something that already has a term. It's called neglect. I mean, think about it. What actual value do kids get from having radical unschooling parents? Do they receive a better education? Well, no, probably not. Are they better prepared for life beyond school, like college, a job, etc.? Well, no again.
I would like to on the job in school and college front. I would actually like to push back on that a little bit. I felt like I was better equipped for college than a lot of my peers because I was so used to finding like key information in books. That was like the primary form of my education. I had more practice at that than my peers even. I also had exceptionally developed research skills because of my unschooling, and so I thrived in college. I graduated with honors from my bachelor's degree. Kids would or not kids, but like other students in my class, whenever we had a test, would ask what I chose for certain questions because they knew that I would have the right answer because I had already perfected my study techniques. So when it comes for a job, the one of the benefits of unschooling is you never really learn how to half-ass something. That wasn't something that I really learned until like senior year of my BA. I didn't really know how to half-ass something. I gave everything my full effort. So because that was how I always did my schooling. Now, again, and this is going to be something you hear me say throughout every unschooling video I make, this depends on the child. I was a very rigid and structured child that loved creating my own schedule and adhering to it day in and day out. I found great comfort in creating my own schedule and adhering to it. So by and large, I always got shit done, and I always made time. Like my mother didn't even really enforce it. I was just that kind of kid that was very self-managing in a lot of ways. Does that mean that it works for every child? Hell no.
Education is still the biggest indicator of success later in life. Unschooling seems to me like something with a lot of risk and like basically no reward. I mean, do unschooling parents provide their kids with certain life skills and knowledge that they wouldn't get in public school? Sure. But you know who else does that? Every other parent to ever exist. I'm sorry, but I mean, some of these parents act like unschooling is some revolutionary idea where, oh, we actually get to teach our kids about cooking and taxes and give them life skills. They don't teach that in school. And it's like, yeah, Cheryl, because you should be doing that anyway. Teaching your kids how to cook and clean and do their taxes, that's not school. That's called the basic responsibilities of parenting. You aren't participating in some grand revolution against the institution of public education. You're doing the bare minimum as a parent. I didn't learn how to do my taxes in school because I didn't need to, because I started working at 16 and my parents explained it to me. And I didn't need cooking or cleaning classes in grade school either for the same reasons. So what gives? Why are these people doing this to their kids if their kids don't really benefit from it all that much? Well, if you take a look at how these parents post about unschooling on social media, it becomes very clear how people get hooked on the idea and wind up actually trying it. At the core of the unschooling movement seems to be a radical distrust of government institutions. In almost every unschooling content creator's page I visited when writing this video, I found them saying things that essentially boil down to, I don't want the government controlling my kid.
I don't want to check boxes about my life and my child for the fucking government. I'm not raising a child that's dependent on the fucking government. I refuse.
Yeah, fuck school, man. The government isn't going to control my life. Now, excuse me while I use the road to get home, where all my electricity and water magically appear in my home. But that anti-institutional, the government isn't taking my
I gotta give him some credit here. The anti-institutional thing, well, by and large, many families were not against public school as a concept. There was this, it wasn't a distrust so much of institutions, but as a way of like propping themselves up, saying how they're better, how they were creating free thinkers and that whole sort of thing. There was still this kind of they didn't necessarily have a problem with public school, and there were even a couple of kids that went back to public school in from middle and high school, or it was primarily just high school, but that was something that happened. But there were a lot that had the idea that children that were outside of public schools were better free thinkers and weren't like followers, sort of like that is something that is kind of prevalent in I will give him that, yes.
kid away mentality is, it's kind of the point, right? Like, these people feel a certain ownership over their kids. They really don't trust the government or institutions, and they feel like the school system is taking something away from them or their kids. I mean, just look at all the top posts on r/unschool. My kid is an honor student at a dumbed down government indoctrination camp. Honey, when you grow up, I want you to be assertive, independent, and strong-willed, but while you're a kid, I want you to be passive, pliable, and obedient. There's this
Okay, we're gonna have to check out r/unschooling. I gotta see that to kind of get a better idea of what the landscape of unschooling is now.
common narrative that mandating school is somehow an oppressive measure by the state, and obviously the common argumentative thread here is the idea that school is a government tool to indoctrinate and control children, and provides no real benefit to them that parents couldn't simply provide themselves. But as we've already gathered, when it comes to this anti-institutional distrust at the core of unschooling, the kids are the ones who get the short end of the stick here. They are the ones who will be less knowledgeable than all of their peers. They are the ones who are more likely to be socially inhibited growing.
So there is a little bit of truth to what he's saying, no less than their peers, In terms of breadth, yes. The unschooling doesn't really provide such a wide range because you're going based off kids' interests, and kids' interests can be rather narrow. Um, that is a concern. They will have deeper knowledge about certain things. So, like when I was a teenager, I was really into the history of medicine. I know almost like very little about American history, which I would have learned while I was in school. I know a bit more about the history of medicine. So it's kind of I don't know, you kind of have to weigh what you view as valuable. Um, Fun fact from the history of medicine, proctology dates back to ancient Egypt. I just I didn't want to there. Cause I remember that because I thought it was so fucking hilarious. I was 14 and I thought it was the most hilarious thing in the world that there was a doctor in ancient Egypt that the translation for it was Doctor of the Anus. And at 14, I thought that was the funniest fucking thing. So just wanted to put that out there.
Up. They're the ones who will have a harder time getting into college or finding a decent job without the necessary proven credentials that would normally be provided by traditional schooling. And so the question remains, what is really going on here? If unschooling doesn't help the kid, and in fact borders on neglect, why do it? Why put your kid through all of that and risk their development and quality of life later on? Who really benefits from all of this? It's certainly not the kids, and not really the parents either. I mean, at the age I am now, I can't imagine being very happy with or willing to have a relationship with my parents if I were raised that way. So again, who benefits? And honestly, this is a question that I got stuck on for a while when putting this video together. I just couldn't fathom how parents everywhere could be so blind to, or perhaps unwilling to see, what seems like obvious potential harms and risks associated with radical unschooling, and simultaneously very willing to completely overstate its benefits. But then I thought about that first video again, and how she described her son's learning process.
It will come at the right time. But if you do not like this idea of sending your kids away for 40 hours a week and then wondering why they have no energy to do anything else, if you are not into your kids conforming, trust that you can follow their interests and they will learn everything they need to learn.
Notice how she, and frankly a lot of other unschooling influencers, speaks about unschooling education.
And I trust my instincts and what I feel is best for my child over anything else that the government or society has to say about it. So make sure you tap that follow button.
Rather than giving evidence to support it or showing proof that unschooling works, they say things like, have faith, trust that it will work, it will come at the right time.
It will come at the right time.
It comes across as less like advocacy for a particular lifestyle and more like preaching, like she's pushing a spiritual or religious agenda. And then I went to her actual profile. I initiate seekers into the second level of spiritual teachings. Oh, interesting. She seems to be like some sort of spiritual teacher. Let's see what she has to teach.
Okay, so far I've actually only been talking about one of the homeschool groups that I was in. I was in two separate homeschool groups, and then when I got older, we participated in an AEP, which was an alternative education program. It allowed us to maintain our homeschooling status, but I was allowed to take classes through the school district, only the classes that I was interested in. And I've seen a variety. Each one had its own culture to it. The pagan homeschool group that I was in, there was a secular homeschool group, a pagan homeschool group, and then the AEP. And the pagan homeschool group, as I've been watching this, and it kind of clicked when he brought up her spiritual teachings thing, there was an aspect of there were so many things wrong with that homeschool group. That's a story time in and of itself, with their very sexualized emails back and forth that made my sister and I were allowed to like read my mom's emails over her shoulder when we were kids, and then she was not expecting a homeschool group chain email sort of thing with moms talking back and forth to turn sexual, so that was uncomfortable. That's its own thing though. That's something different to talk about. but there were a lot of people in the unschooling pagan group that did have the it'll had that kind of mystical talking about it, and there were some kids from that group that did do unschooling kind of the way it's presented here, where there is no facilitation, and the kids did watch a lot of TV, and they were kind of dumb. Uh, I actually don't know if they were dumb, but uneducated for sure. So there are some parents that are like this. There are some families that are like this, and it is a bit of an issue. I believe they're doing unschooling wrong. Personally, I think it's just negligent parenting. But and this is where I kind of start to question: is unschooling different than the radical unschooling, or is that just unschooling rebranded and presented in more of an extreme? This is all things we're going to be kind of looking into.
Teach us, shall we? Let's see. Oh, here's her website. Let's have a look. Okay. All right. Looks pretty normal. Oh, there are 4 kinds of magic. White magic, the use of will. Black magic, the use of fear. And red magic, the use of sacrifice. When you've mastered those 3 wands, you can begin sexual magic, the most powerful. Oh, so she's an insane person. No, got it. No, that makes me feel much better about the safety and well-being of her kids, for sure. But seriously, though, just by quickly skimming this person's website and social media, you can easily gather that their atypical parenting method is the result of some, frankly, pretty insane spiritual and political beliefs.
You know, when I was waking up spiritually, the last thing I wanted to do was like grounded human things. I was learning about the supernatural, so I just wanted to learn more supernatural powers. And most people that identify with the term witch have become experts in either white magic, black magic, and then red magic, which is blood magic. Now, I'm an expert in all 3 of these things.
So when your third eye is open, you're seeing the unseen and knowing the unknown. But if you don't know who you are and what your truth is, seeing things that aren't there and knowing things that other people don't know is a pretty good recipe for ending up in the psych ward.
Shut the fuck up. Let me die in peace.
And this is kind of the moment where it all fell into place for me. These TikTok moms with their unschooling and weird parenting methods and strange political and social beliefs regarding their kids, it's not really out of pure concern for their kids, is it? I mean, I'm sure that plays a role to some extent, but they're not doing it entirely in service of the best interest of their kids. They're doing it in service of an ideology. And when you realize this, suddenly all of it makes sense. It makes sense why they would risk harm to their child despite very little benefit to them, why they would likely deprive their child of a better future to have more control over their present, and why none of their beliefs actually correlate with reality, because they're consumed by ideology. An ideology where they have total control over their kids, akin almost to a type of owner.
Honestly, he's not wrong here with certain families. I can think of, even in the secular group, a couple of families where the homeschooling, all the kids were homeschooled. They were homeschooled off the bat. They had never been to public school. And there was high levels of control within that family. My mom always had very open and frank conversations with me, and when I would communicate some of this stuff to my peers, particularly there was this whole thing with because I was getting at the age where I would have my first period, and my mom kind of told me her experience with her first period as a way to kind of reassure me and explain, how it's going to feel and all of that. And I ended up having that similar discussion about like periods with some of the other girls in the homeschool group that were around my age. And there was this one girl that then went and asked her mom how old she was when she started her period. And her mother fucking went off on her. How dare she ask such a personal question? And she was grounded, and like it was this whole thing. And like there was some tension between our families after that. Like there is this kind of weird control thing with some of the families. I will give him that. There are certain families that homeschool or unschool their children as a form of control. There are.
An ideology where public services like education are to be seen as threats, the state interfering with their sacrosanct, untouchable relationship with their child. An ideology where children are not nurtured and protected, but used as some tool in the revolt against the administrative state. This, my friends, is reactionary ideology thinly veiled with the guise of concern for children. And when you think about it, that actually makes a lot of sense, because the ideological foundation that gives way to things like unschooling is actually deeply intertwined with reactionary politics. All of the things we just mentioned about ideology, the obsession with control, the perception that public services are an attack on freedom, the use of children and the concept of innocence to push political sentiment. These are all core tenets of conservative ideology. Now, I want to be absolutely clear. Unschooling is a vehicle for the reinforcement of certain right-leaning ideals, and I consider
It can be. It 100% can be. There are also plenty of liberals that unschool their children. It's not a That's one thing I'm going to disagree with him pretty hard on here, is that uh unschooling is not a political act. It's not meant to be a political stance. Some families do use it that way, unfortunately, but by and large, as a whole, unschooling is not political in motivation.
the people who do it to be political radicals, even if they aren't outspokenly political people. Because it kind of stems from this libertarian idea that people exist as individuals by themselves rather
It can. There are certain families that is how it is. Yes.
than as a part of a society that requires give and take in order to function. And when applied to children and education, we see it kind of morph into this ideology that parents should have ultimate control over their kids, and if they so choose, should be able to kind of just opt out of society and what makes it function. The unschooling ideology frames children more as property to be valued and protected than as people who can and must influence and be influenced by the world. It's kind of like the crystal mommy equivalent of believing that driver's licenses are authoritarian.
Should someone have to have a government-issued license to drive a car?
Hell no.
What's next? Requiring a license to make toast in your own damn toaster?
If you believe that your kids are your property, the rights of which must be upheld, then obviously the idea that school be mandatory for children comes across as totalitarianism. The same way that a libertarian who owns a car can't conceive of why people on the road might want them to show a little bit of competency before operating a motor vehicle. But we have to do those things, right?
So here's where I struggle the most with him. I think he's kind of painting a rather diverse collection of people with a very broad brush. There are some people where, yes, it's politically and specifically like with a libertarian mindset sort of motivated. I'm not going to deny that that's the case. I met a family or two where that was the case. They were big on not being influenced by the government, and so they wanted to unschool their kids. Like, I'm not going to say that that was not a motivating factor for some families. It 100% was, but there were more families where it was due to either religious reasons or bad experiences with the public school system, or sometimes just doing what's best for their kid.
Because as much as libertarians and conservatives like to pretend this isn't the case, we don't live in a vacuum. We exist in society. Every action we take affects others, and likewise, we are all affected by actions others take. That is the cost of living in an advanced society that contains the amenities we enjoy from it, which can also be said for children and education. And radical unschooling parents are against all of this. They're against the concept of building strong, close-knit communities that look out for each other. They're against the concept that formal institutions provide use and value to society.
So those two examples, that is true. By and large, again, no. I've said this before. Many unschooling families even had certain kids that did go to public school and ones that stayed home and unschooled. And or sometimes they would also use like an AEP, or there were a variety of mismatching ways that these families kind of did their schooling, and they're not against community. A lot of unschooling and homeschooling have their own community through different homeschool groups. And they're not even saying that the public institutions and school itself doesn't provide use. Many of them do think that it provides a use. It's just that the environment was too toxic for their child to thrive. That was what, granted, they're probably not in the majority. I would say maybe a third of them, that's how they felt about school. A lot of them, because of their experience or due to religious belief or their political beliefs, were very against school. So that is the case for about 2/3 for the majority. Even then, though, they didn't say that school didn't provide what didn't have like any use to it at all, just that it wasn't as useful as unschooling. They probably viewed it as inferior, but not necessarily useless. But that whole thing about being against community is just wrong. They weren't against a community that looks out for each other. There were even the libertarians. It was more about finding a community that shared similar ideals and they felt that their kids could be supported in.
Society, and they're against the idea that their children are not solely theirs to control. And if that sounds far-fetched to you, if you don't believe me, just look at how they themselves talk about their kids' future.
There was like a homeschooling expert that was like, well, my concern is that they're not going to be civic-minded members of a functioning democracy. That's the whole point, is to not pump out more civic-minded members of a functioning democracy.
I mean, she said it herself. She does not want her kids to be able to function in society. She does not want things like democracy and society and the world around them to be of any concern to her kids. They don't.
And if my experience is anything like, there were parents like that, but they were in the minority. Even those that weren't necessarily for public school, or didn't view it as public school as useful as unschooling, they still wanted their children to be upstanding members of society and integrate into society. They just had a different way of going about it.
Just not give a shit if their kids are successful and happy. They downright do not want them to be. Because again, they are consumed by an ideology that clouds their worldview. One where the concept of looking out for those around you and societal responsibility and civics are the problems rather than the solution. Because to them, it's more important what their kids represent than what they will go on to do. To them, it's more important that their kids are a tool for some rebellion against the state than it is that their kids lead long, happy, and successful lives. Again, they care more about the politics of unschooling and what it says about them than they do about their fucking kids. And look, I'm not even saying the education system is without issues. I'll be the first person to criticize the modern day schooling system. Because as flawed and imperfect as these institutions are, at a systemic level, we create them because they provide use to society. It is useful to society to ensure that each generation grows up having more knowledge and more skills than the previous one. And we do that by ensuring that they're taught by people who have proved that they have that knowledge to provide them. Teachers, professors, mentors, and things like unschooling just deprive kids access to that. And for what? So they aren't indoctrinated by the government? Over and over, you'll hear these parents on unschooling TikTok going on about conforming. How they refuse to let their kids become cogs in a machine manufactured by the powers that be while their kids' real strengths and potential are being ignored. And does the standardized system we use for education ignore the potential of a ton of kids? Yes. Are there kids that aren't performing well in school due to a lack of focus on their individual strengths? Absolutely. But the answer is not to disengage from the system entirely. You can only change a system that needs changing by engaging with it, by changing it from within. Completely removing yourself from the equation doesn't do anyone any good. Not you, not society, and definitely not the children. And look, I get it. Sometimes I find myself considering defecting from institutions that I've lost faith into, convincing myself that participating in those systems is conformity, or even complicity in the flaws of them. But who does that really help besides making me feel better and morally superior? Who am I benefiting by not doing what I can to improve those systems rather than walking away from them? Because at the end of the day, working from within a system to change it for the better is not complicity, it's participation. The act of putting aside pride and fear and working towards something better is closer to revolution than whatever the fuck is going on TikTok.
If you go on TikTok and it's someone just talking about something or a clip of something, there is always Subway Surfers, Rocket League, or GTA playing underneath it in order to keep your attention.
And these unschooling parents do have one thing right. These kids are the future. They're going to be running the world one day, and their voices do matter in the equation of what's important to teach them. And yeah, maybe we could be doing more to ensure kids are getting as much out of their public education as possible. But to do nothing? To sit around and expect them to know what it is they need to know? It's not just overly simplistic and frankly naive, it's dangerous. If you have a problem with the education system, if you don't like the way your local public school is treating your kid, if you feel like your child is being left behind, then do something about it. Join the PTA, go to parent-teacher meetings, ask your kid what they did in school today, and fill in the gaps at home. That's really how things change.
So again, though, like I love that this actually went back around to my personal experience. Sometimes even involved parents can't get through to the school. Sometimes, and not for the record, not every school has an active PTA. Just for the record, not every school has an active PTA, and those that are in comes from my work experience, but those that are like Title I schools, those that are in more impoverished areas are far less likely to have a PTA, and if they do have a PTA, there's far fewer volunteers than other PTAs. So I just want to put that out there. And sometimes parents can be very involved in their child's education, and the decision that's made from all of that experience is to pull the child because the school will not listen and has failed so many times in rapid succession. Now, in general, Kevin F has 1.9K subscribers, so please, if you are going over to him, go only to spread positivity. I have no interest in shitting on a smaller channel. I do think that he has some valid points. I think that he has unfortunately gotten a misrepresentation of unschooling by and large through TikTok, and unfortunately I think a lot of people are getting an improper look at unschooling through TikTok. Some of his critiques I just flat out disagree with. I understand his concerns though, and I think that I think unschooling by and large is a specific child and parent fit. If it does not fit both, it fits neither. Unschooling happened to fit myself and my mom very well. My mother was very involved. She found many opportunities for me to learn, and I was a very curious child and very self-motivated. So I ended up fine. I have a master's in education now. I'm getting a job as a teacher. Every degree that I have, I got with honors. Unschooling is not an intellectual death sentence, but it is not for every child, not by a long shot. And with the availability of online public schooling now, I think that that's probably a more viable option for many families, for which public schooling has not proven very beneficial for their child. There's multiple different ways for children to get their education, and I think that it's worth exploring them. I don't think the two examples that he showed, those mothers are not doing their children a service. They are not providing them with educational opportunities. And the one we're going to cover both, but there's the one with the darker hair, I think is using her kids for social media exploitation personally, and we are going to be taking a look at her because she actually really pisses me off. But those are my thoughts on homeschooling, unschooling, a bit about my experience with it, why I started unschooling, my family started unschooling. I've been going for an hour and a half now, so I don't have any time left for rambles. So I'm going to leave it here. Let me know what you thought of the video. Let me know what you think of unschooling and the representation of these women versus like the experience that I've shared. If you were unschooled, a couple of you said you had been unschooled, let me know how your experience may have differed from mine, because unschooling, because it's unregulated, because there's no standard, can be extraordinarily different for different kids. So I would love to hear that. I would love to see it. Hopefully I can get this out this week. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.